Well, as we continued to march through Power of the Force 2, the pattern of episode 4, 5, and 6 was going to continue. And as new waves were released, I continued to hunt for them from afar, from close up, sometimes having luck, sometimes, and more often than not, finding nothing. It almost seemed sometimes like new waves were hotly guarded treasure that if you found it, you were, lord of the cavern. But finding that new wave was very elusive. This next wave, though, I remember very specifically finding. Or getting. The memory is super clear. It was a celebration. The reason being, I found an unopened case at that exact Toys R Us, the one I just showed, which was Tustin in Orange County, California, sitting right when I walked in on a cart that had yet to be brought to the aisle. I remember walking up to it and being like, wait a minute, is that a new case of Star Wars figures? Could those be figures I don't have yet? And grabbing the full case pack and looking around to see if anyone saw me and running to like the Barbie aisle or something that was unrelated to action figures and tearing it open and just the pure joy of having a fresh case pack figure. And this was a great wave. It was the second, well actually no, maybe third, third. No, are we on second? I can't even count. Yeah, no, we're on third. Well, let's see, we had Boba Fett and that one. Yeah, Return of the Jedi wave, second wave. And our first ever Jabba Palace character. This was one of those sort of, I guess you call it teams or, factions, the aliens of Jabba's palace. Boy, can't talk today. And Bib Fortuna with his giant finger and all was the first ever modern figure. Now, I actually have very vivid memories of getting the vintage figure too. This was one where my dad took me to Toys R Us back when I lived in Connecticut, and allowed me to pick out a figure. And I remember debating between getting Bib Fortuna and another Ewok. But since I already owned 2 or 3 Ewoks, I went with Bib Fortuna, and I'm so glad I did, because he wound up being a real favorite. Bib Fortuna as a character shows up a lot in toys. In fact, so much that when Just Toys did their Bendies, he was one of the very few, call it background aliens, to wind up in the line. Very few did. Maybe Admiral Akbar was the only other one. And of course, kids today know him from his shot on The Mandalorian, but if you look closely, that staff he's holding is from the vintage Kenner toy. So Bib Fortuna does a lot. But making toys and consumer product of him, it tends to, his proportions are a little odd, and they tend to not quite translate as well. The original toy, while it was redecoed later in the Saga line, was still not quite the right proportions. He was resculpted later and made a little bit thinner. This was only the second ever modern sculpt we got of him. And, still closer, but still not exactly perfect. We haven't gotten, if you will, a vintage collection Bib Fortuna figure. So we're still holding out as his second release as kind of the definitive one at the moment. But that first original Power of the Force 2 Bib Fortuna is still a really great figure. And at the time, it was very, satisfying to finally have a Jabba Palace alien. I'm still curious why we've never gotten the red-robed Bib Fortuna, who has a lot of toy history. That's because this is how he appeared in original Return of the Jedi promotional material, before his robe was changed to the film-accurate brown. I always thought this would be an obvious, convention repaint we'd get, or pack in with Jabba. So, hey, wow, 3 for $7.50. God, figures were so much cheaper back in the day. All right, moving on. The next figure in this wave that I pulled right out of a master case pack in pure joy at Tustin Toys R Us was Lando Calrissian in his skiff guard disguise. I know that character actually has a proper name now, and even that outfit was used in the Solo movie, but I'm going with skiff guard disguise because that's what it says on package. So, pretty cool figure, including his helmet and his pike. Another figure that, again, shows up in a lot of Star Wars toy lines because it's really cool when you have a figure not just with a removable helmet, but in disguise. And he looks very, action-oriented. Obviously, this is from one of the most iconic action scenes in the trilogy when, they fight over the Pit of Carkoon. And obviously a scene that a lot of collectors like to recreate in action figure form, both from the vintage line and the modern line. And it's really fun to, have that scene come to life. So Lando here made his Power of the Force 2 modern figure debut in this wave. He was still a little bulked up, so this was still in the original design phase before enough time had passed that figures could be resculpted. But he had a lot more detail than the vintage figure. The vintage figure didn't have a lot of paint ops on things like the mask teeth and on the belt. A lot of it was, a lot of the vintage figures, were basic paint jobs. But I always thought this figure, especially because of the dark skin and the dark vest, they kind of blended together for me as a kid, and I wish he had a little bit more, silver deco or white deco showing the details. But, vintage figures, that was part of the look and feel of them. But, I think the helmet is one that really stood out because it had no deco and it always had that little dot on the top where it broke off the mold. The new helmets we were getting in the modern series, however, were fully decoed, and that, to me, was one of the coolest parts of them, was getting all of the teeth and the different colors, the two-tone of the helmet. We also got our very first pike, Force Pike, I think is what they're called, or Vibro Axe sometimes. So an accessory that was going to go on to be with many, many figures in the line, and this was the first ever modern one. So, again, still beefed up with those giant C-clamp hands, although maybe not as noticeable as the previous Lando because his armor kind of hid it. I mean, that first Lando had a skin-tight shirt that showed off his abs and his pecs, and he was definitely working out on that solo flex machine in Cloud City. Future versions of this Lando were a little thinner and more on the money, I guess, if you will, as far as his actual look. We even got some off-screen versions from the Sandstorm, and finally a vintage release with redone legs. So whether you were recreating a scene from Jabba's palace, or you wanted to recreate the battle over the pit of Carkoon with the Sarlacc pit, you were now starting to build up your characters that were going to populate your skiff one day. All right, next up in this wave of 4 was a Han Solo, and a new Han Solo in Endor gear, although he reused a lot of parts from previous versions and had a bit of one of the more well-known running changes, shall we say. So we'll get into that in a moment. But he reused most of the parts from the original Cantina Han, including his head and his body and his legs. He got new arms and a new rubbery PVC cape, but he still had a lot of parts left over. Now, as far as Endor Han, there's really two looks. There's the version in the trench coat and the version without the trench coat. This toy, because the trench coat was done with PVC plastic and the arms were sculpted, it was non-removable, so you basically only could recreate the scenes where Han was wearing his trench coat. Later on in the line, we actually got a version without trench coat, even with the little detonators that he was using to blow up the shield generator. The vintage line took the soft goods approach, where the cloak or overcoat, trench coat was done in fabric, so that if you wanted to remove it, you could have both of his looks from Endor in one figure. And again, this was a figure actually I fondly remember getting. I got it on my birthday, along with Endor Leia, Wicket, and I want to say Neem Num, and I had them all packaged together. They were given to me like in one box. So the vintage figure, yeah, you could remove that, the overcoat, the trench coat there, so now you had both of his looks. And this actually, for a vintage figure, that's a pretty good face sculpt of Harrison Ford. You can even see his neck in that one. All right, so the whole is it blue or is it brown, yellow debate started with those dresses and continues with Han Solo, especially with the Hoth Han Solo, where the debate of whether it's blue or a brown coat has confused and befuddled many a fan over the years. While it was clearly brown in the movie, the blue action figure gave a lot of people the memory that the coat was blue. Kind of like thinking that Biggs is in Star Wars on Tatooine because he showed up in the storybook. All right, so what is the blue versus brown debate with this figure? Well, it's not his coat, but rather his legs. The original release of this figure, the one that I pulled out of that case pack since it was a very early ship, had blue legs. And now we all know that Han Solo in Return of the Jedi wears brown pants. And it's obvious they could do brown pants because we had one in the Carbonite Han. So a running change was made, and you can see here how it was shared parts with the original Han, where they went from blue with the yellow stripe to brown with the yellow stripe, which was correct. So, why did this happen? Mistakes happen all the time in toys. I'm just glad they fixed it. Now, there is another third version of Han from Endor that does get, oddly, some toy love, and that's when he takes over an AT-ST to trick the Imperials to opening the shield bunker. And Hasbro eventually made a figure of this. And I don't know if Han put on the whole outfit. I don't know. I always like to just put on the helmet. But it was a great way to get out more Endor AT-ST or ATST drivers. And whether or not Han put on the whole outfit or just the helmet, hey, AT-ST drivers are cool figures. And hey, now you had a third version of Han for Endor. You had Camouflage Overcoat, No Overcoat, and AT-ST. The more well-known Overcoat version was made in a few different releases throughout the line. You had versions on single cards, versions were released in multi-packs, and of course you had the Black Series version in both a box and a single card. In fact, it's now being re-released on a single card later in 2021. So, popular character with kids and collectors. Alright, next up we have the man himself, Emperor Palpatine, or as most kids just know him, the Emperor. So this sculpt is very interesting because I think it's one of the Power of the Force 2 sculpts that held up the longest throughout the entire line. I mean, it was just dead on from day one. The vintage figure had 3 different ways you could obtain it. First through a mail-away, then later as a single card Return of the Jedi figure, and then finally it was re-released in 1985 in the Power of the Jedi line, and in this case he got a brand new card and a new shiny silver coin there, but same card art, just reconfigured for the new branding. I got my figure specifically with the mail-away, and I absolutely remember being so excited because the Emperor was kind of a big surprise, especially for me as a kid seeing the movie, that here was, we were really seeing Vader's boss on screen. So while the vintage figure was, a really advanced sculpt, shall we say, for the line, especially because it came at the very tail end where the cloaks were sculpted. This new figure for Power of the Force 2 was very, very close to it. It felt very much like a recreation, an update of the vintage figure, and was even reused for a hologram figure. And Palpatine as a character, while he's mostly known as the Emperor to, the masses, he was there to, teach kids not to turn to evil, because, evil does really bad things to you, I suppose. And many Palpatine figures were made throughout the line, some with lightning, some with light-up lightning. They had, very early on in Power of the Force 2, versions from the books. They had snap-on lightning. There were versions from the prequels, obviously, where he's called Darth Sidious, because that was his official, Sith name, and we got to learn that. But even when there would be official Palpatine figures, they just never seemed to hit the mark. The sculpt was always off, and I was always disappointed. I always hated these figures, because I was like, why can't they make a better Palpatine? It's so annoying. I can't stand these. I mean, he's like the boss of bosses. He's the head bad guy for Star Wars, yet over and over again, the Power of the Force 2 figure and the vintage figure were the best ones, no matter how often they sculpted them. Even the other scales, like 12-inch, I just felt like they couldn't get it right. Whether it was the soft goods or the face sculpt, even the original Black Series figure, I was just like,
where did you get that dress? It's awful, and those shoes and that coat, jeez.
So the Black Series figure eventually got a remake with really amazing face sculpts. In fact, 3 different heads that you could do interchangeable, as well as his throne, which has only shown up once in 3 3/4, which was actually used a redo of the Power of the Force 2 figure in a permanently sitting position. This came with one of the cinema scenes 3-packs that we'll get to in a couple episodes. But yeah, nailing Emperor Palpatine as a toy, to me it's astonishing that this version held up so long. In fact, the figure that I think dethroned it, if you will, was not released until the Disney sequels with a 3-pack at Target, and then finally this single release that only showed up overseas, where you really got the fabric on the outfit, you saw the details. But this is, I think, the first Palpatine since Power of the Force 2 that feels like it overtakes that as far as your definitive Emperor Palpatine. So hey, yay Palpatine!